Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So, as we go through the second part of unemployment and full employment, carrying forward from our previous lecture, I hope you'll recall this diagram where we talked a little bit about the gap created between potential GDP and real GDP and how the estimates differ. This is an older version. You're welcome to look at the newer version in the textbook. So let's go back and see a much more recent version of what the output gap and unemployment rate looks like. And we can see here on the right in figure B the difference between the unemployment rate and the natural unemployment rate. So let's elaborate a little bit about the quantity of real GDP at full employment. We've already defined that as one of the ways of looking at potential GDP. And we also stated that over the business cycle, real GDP fluctuates around potential GDP, and the gap between the real GDP and the potential GDP is called the output gap. So here you can see, imagine that the straight line is your potential GDP, and this is the real GDP, and this is the output gap being created. So one more time, the gap between the real GDP and the potential GDP, what you actually achieved and what your desired achievement level was. Your projected ability to have performed at your best ability to create the potential GDP versus what you actually did achieve, which is the real GDP, and that is known as the output gap. Now, as the output gap fluctuates over the business cycle, the unemployment rate also fluctuates around the natural unemployment rate, and we can see that here. So, when the economy is at full employment, the unemployment rate obviously is equal to the natural unemployment rate, and real GDP is equal to potential GDP. So, in other words, the output gap is zero. Now, this output gaps concept is very, very important for you to understand and to keep in mind what allows an economy to achieve its potential GDP and how we calculated our real GDP from the previous chapter. So when the unemployment rate is less than the natural unemployment rate, this means you have achieved well, which means your GDP is greater than what the expected GDP was or potential GDP was, and the output gap is positive. On the other hand, when the unemployment rate is higher than the natural unemployment rate, it means the economy did not attain as much as it had expected to, and as a result, the output gap is negative. So, our next topic begins with the concepts of price level, inflation, and deflation. So, for example, in countries where you do have student loans, or you might incur some even in the present day scenario in our local concept, what will it really cost you to pay that off? You borrow a certain amount. By the time you'll be paying it off, what will be the actual cost of it? What will your parents' life savings buy when they retire? And all of this depends on what happens to the price level, or the average level of prices, rather what we call the value of money. You're all familiar with the concept that over time, money actually buys you less than what it does at present. So in the future, the same amount of money will buy you less goods and services. So if there is a persistently rising price level, we call that an inflationary phenomenon. On the other hand, if there is a falling price level persistently, we call that a deflation. So why are these two concepts problems? As you can see, Low, steady, and anticipated inflation or deflation is not a problem. If you have already made certain adjustments to how much consumption and investment you will do, expecting prices to go up or production to go up, whatever the level of price increase might be or decrease might be, it may not hurt your economic decision making as much. Why are these two concepts to be problems? Because one, it redistributes income from one entity to the other. Certain people might be earning more, others might be earning less. It redistributes wealth. There may be businesses that acquire higher amount of assets, and these are all explained very well in the book. It also lowers your real GDP and employment. We are watching how employment reduction is causing difficulty in income. Once income goes down, consumption expenditure reduces drastically. Investment criteria also change. People are more apt to be not risk takers. They're apt to be adverse to risk. Slow down on their investment because the future is kind of bleak. Or one can divert resources from production. Perhaps it's necessary to make some changes in your investment plan depending on what the foreseeable future is predicted at present. We're facing many types of decisions and outcomes because of the pandemic, and keep that in mind as we proceed through the chapter. So, how will the COVID-19 impact the labor market and price levels? Think for a moment, go back to the very first few slides that we looked at to see how you expect the pandemic will end up affecting the labor market indicators. What type of economic activity rate do you expect it to increase? Do you expect to slow down? Do you expect it to stay the same? How will unemployment rate change? Think for a moment what you saw in the various countries that we looked at earlier. How will the employment rate change? Remember, your employment rate is directly correlated to many other factors. One of the most important ones is the creation of jobs. Job creation is possible with higher investment, expecting higher consumption. As you start looking for jobs, if investment is happening, chances are your ability to gain a job or access to the employment market will be higher. On the other hand, because of the pandemic, income across the globe has suffered because investment opportunities have not only not opened up, existing investment has slowed down, existing facilities for work has closed down, and consumption and investment expenditure had to be redistributed. If you're interested to explore further, here are a few links for you to take a look at. Feel free to go in and see what are the people saying, what are we thinking about. So as we move forward, we'll be looking at price level inflation and deflation. To begin with, let's look at some price indices. An index allows you to measure a concept. So the average level of prices is measured by using a price index. So for example, if I just tell you mangoes cost 10 taka today and they used to cost 5 taka yesterday, that's not enough information to calculate a price level. Your next question would be, how many mangoes are we talking about? What is the quantity that we need to be referring to? Without the concept of both price and quantity, we cannot create an index. We need to know how much that same good was priced at previously and what is the present price, keeping the quantity the same, because we're trying to calculate the price index. Imagine this as the stock market index. You're looking at share prices going up over time or losing value over time. And together, when you combine all types of prices of different types of goods and services in the stock market, you can create an index and kind of gauge which direction the entire stock market index is moving. Is it going up? Is it coming down? In the UK, there is an Office for National Statistics. It calculates two different types of indices every month. One is the retail price index, and the other is the one that we're more familiar with, the consumer price index. For your convenience, the book has interchangeably used both of these concepts. So the RPI, or retail price index, is usually defined to equal 100 for the reference or the base period. If you look at your book for the 10th edition, you will see the base period is looked at as July 2015, and you can see a few more statistics here. So in order to construct this CPI or RPI, we will first need to select and update a basket. We'll need to conduct a monthly price survey, and then we'll have to actually calculate the price index. Now, the two baskets are a little different for calculating the RPI and CPI because we're dealing with price. This is more or less the RPI basket. So whatever in the UK the average household uses, that calculates their RPI. And this is the CPI. This is more based upon consumer goods by households, residents, institutions, and whoever comes to visit. So the ONS, or the Office of National Statistics, employees check out about close to 180,000 prices, and you can see what they do with it, the different types of goods and services, and what type of places throughout the UK. Now, the method that we use in the calculations are illustrated with a very, very simple economy that maybe only produces one good and one service. So consider RPI and CPI to be the same, and we can look at how the calculation is done. So assume that this is an economy where the consumption is limited to just oranges and haircuts, and we have quantity and price and the cost of the RPI basket. Bear with me to understand why are we looking at the cost of a basket. In your basket, you can put whatever goods you wish, just like when you go grocery shopping. In order to gauge whether the price index is going up or down, imagine the price of all the goods and services that a nation consumes or produces, right? So we have our quantities and prices here. As we have learned, you can multiply the price and the quantity, and together we have a £50 cost of the basket. Now, this is the cost of the basket in the base period. Keep that in mind, please. The book uses the same quantity for calculating the RPI and CPI. I have changed the quantity just to humor you, to keep in mind that even though we're looking at different prices and the quantities do change for consumption and production, but for our calculation purpose, we need to refer back to 10 and 5, which are the quantities from the previous slide.